That phrase, "I'm not gonna hurt you," twists in my mind like a rusted nail. Each time I hear it again, the sensation of terror unfurls, seeping back into me, into the place where fear festers and grows. And in the dark corners of my memory, it waits, tapping at the edges of my thoughts, eager to be let back in. I could have ignored it, rationalized it as a trick of the mind. After all, the mind has ways of warping reality, especially when you're alone, especially when there's something off about the night. But what happened at that gas station? What happened that night? It stayed with me. It clawed its way into my dreams, into the way I see the world, and no matter how I try to push it away, it lingers. I guess I should start where it began. It was late, maybe just after midnight, and everything felt off-kilter. That's something I've always been attuned to, those small, imperceptible shifts in the world around you, like reality itself is holding its breath. My husband, Carl, and I were on a road trip, something we did to escape the suffocating routines of our lives, a chance to breathe, or at least pretend we could. We stopped for gas at one of those desolate stations you only find in places where no one cares to stop, the kind of place that feels forgotten. The road leading up to it was dark, not a single car in sight, and the gas station itself, one flickering bulb barely hanging on, and an old, weathered sign that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Two intersecting roads met at an awkward angle, and the gas station sat in the middle of it like a grimy afterthought. Carl was driving that night. He got out to pump the gas while I stayed in the Jeep, scrolling through my phone to pass the time. The top was down, and with no rear windows on the Jeep, the back was just an empty space, a yawning void between me and whatever was out there. That's when I heard it. "I'm not going to hurt you." The voice wasn't close yet, but it carried in the stillness, somehow soft and sharp at the same time, like it didn't belong in the world I knew. I froze. Something cold, primal gripped me, a sensation I hadn't felt since I was a kid, alone in my room, convinced that there were monsters hiding in the shadows. The rational part of me told me it was just some drifter, probably harmless, just looking for spare change. But instinct, the deep, ancient kind that lives in your bones, told me to run. I turned, slowly, my heart hammering in my chest, and saw him. He stood a few yards away, bathed in the dim glow of the single working light. His silhouette wavered like something out of a nightmare, his wild gray hair sticking out beneath a tattered beanie. He wore an oversized jacket, pockets bulging, hiding his hands. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said again, taking a step closer. His voice was calm, too calm, and the way he said it made me feel the exact opposite. My skin prickled. Every instinct screamed at me to get away, but I didn't move. I couldn't. He shuffled toward the Jeep, the sound of his feet dragging on the cracked pavement, the rustle of his jacket brushing against itself. My mind raced. Why couldn't I see his hands? Why did that matter so much? Was he just a homeless guy? Maybe. But something about him, his voice, his movements, the empty roads, the way the darkness seemed to press in around us, made the air thick with danger. Carl was still pumping gas, oblivious to the man's approach. The stranger was close now, too close. "I just need some help," the man said, almost pleading. His tone didn't match his expression, which was vacant. Eyes that didn't seem to hold any warmth, any life. "Do you have any money? I'm not going to hurt you." That phrase again, like he was trying to convince himself. Suddenly, Carl was back in the car. I didn't even hear him get in. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he jammed them into the ignition. He didn't say a word, just threw the car into drive, his face pale, eyes wide. We sped out of there, leaving the gas nozzle dangling from the pump, the man standing in the lot, watching us disappear into the night. The silence between us was suffocating. My throat was tight, and my heart wouldn't slow down. Finally, Carl spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I had to leave. I had this horrible feeling, like if we stayed a second longer. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. I hadn't said anything about my own feeling. I didn't have to. He'd felt it too. A few days later, we were back home, and I was still replaying the events of that night in my head, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself that nothing was going to happen, that we had overreacted. But then we watched that video, the one by the security expert. He was talking about something completely unrelated, the Kenyan mall shooting, but what he said made my blood run cold. He talked about how, in every tragedy, there are always people who say they had a feeling beforehand, a sense that something was wrong, a gut instinct, and how the ones who survive are the ones who listen to it. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The tears came fast, hot, and uncontrollable. I buried my face in my hands, shaking, barely able to get the words out. I had that feeling, Carl. I had it. He wrapped his arms around me, and I clung to him like a lifeline, the weight of everything crashing down on me. We had escaped, but from what? What would have happened if we hadn't left? I'll never know. But that phrase, that voice, it still haunts me. I'm not going to hurt you. Even now, when I'm alone, when the world grows quiet and the night stretches on, I hear it again, and I wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't listened to our fear?